At this point, you should have all the pieces in place with which to launch your podcast. You have your audio, you have your RSS feed ready to go, you have your hosting ready to go. Now it's finally time to launch. Okay, and so a couple of things that you need to realize though before you launch. Before you submit your podcast to iTunes or Stitcher Radio, you need to realize that the first 2 months of your podcast life is very critical. And as soon as you launch, you want to be able to create some sort of buzz about your podcast. And the real reason for this is you want to have as many downloads as possible in the shortest period of time as possible. And you want people to subscribe to your podcast and leave a bunch of reviews to your podcast, because that will increase the exposure of your podcast to the general iTunes population. Now, if you manage to get enough downloads past a certain threshold, you'll instantly be listed in the new and noteworthy section of iTunes. Now, this is very important because being displayed in new and noteworthy will provide some very critical early exposure to your podcast. And once you make new and noteworthy, you literally have only 8 weeks of front page exposure on iTunes, and you really need to take advantage of that. Okay? But in order to make new and noteworthy in the first place, you kind of need to make a big splash going out. And so to facilitate this, what you want to do is you want to make sure you have at least 5 episodes in the bank when you launch. Because when you have 5 episodes, that's 5x the number of downloads. If you can have more than 5, that's even better, because you want a large number of downloads as soon as you launch. Okay. Number 2, make sure you have some sort of giveaway in place. Another factor in making new and noteworthy is the number of reviews and subscriptions that you can get in the shortest amount of period of time as possible. So a lot of people aren't going to just leave you a review right off the bat, and so you kind of need to incentivize them in some sort of way. Offer some sort of giveaway. If they sign up, they're entered in some sort of contest. Whatever you come up with, make sure it's compelling. And after your initial launch of 5 episodes, make sure you can post subsequent podcasts in very high frequency. I recommend at least 2 episodes a week for 8 straight weeks. If you can do more, if you can do every day, that's even better, because what you're trying to do early on is you're trying to maximize the number of downloads to your podcast. And of course, if you have a blog and you have a following already, make sure you let your email list know about your podcast. Make sure you put a post down on your blog letting other people know that you're starting and launching a podcast. Okay, and let's say you don't have a large following, let's say you don't have a large email list, then what I suggest you do is you try to collaborate with other people. Try to collaborate with people or businesses. Early on, your podcast is not going to have any advertising on it. So what you can do is you can actually offer free advertising in return for a mention on a partner's blog or a business blog. Now, again, you're going to need some sort of contacts. If you don't have any contacts, reach out to businesses that are going to be related to your podcast who are looking for exposure for their businesses. And a lot of times you can just strike a deal. You'll mention their business for like the first 10 episodes in return for just a brief mention on their blog. And again, what you're trying to do is you're trying to increase the amount of reach that you have early on for your launch. A couple other tips. This one's kind of related to that graphic that you created for your podcast. Make sure your graphic is eye-catching and that it stands out even when it's shrunk, because that graphic's going to be used all over iTunes, and sometimes it's going to be an itty-bitty picture that will represent your entire podcast. And one mistake that I've noticed with other people is they use text on this image, and they didn't make the font size very large, so as a result, when Apple shrinks that image, the text is pretty much unreadable. You don't want to fall into that same trap. Okay, so once you've gathered 5 episodes, you got your giveaway in place, and you have your collaborators and partners in place, now's the time that you can submit your podcast to iTunes and Stitcher Radio. Okay, so I'm just going to go over a brief demo now. I'm going to show you my sample podcast contest landing page, and then I'm going to walk you through an iTunes submission and Stitcher Radio submission. Okay, so this was my podcast launch page when I first launched my podcast. Here, I basically described that I was launching a podcast, and then I talked about my giveaway. Okay, and so as part of my contest, I gave away a lifetime membership to my Creative Profitable Online Store course, which is worth $700. I also gave away free 30-minute one-on-one consultations, website critiques, and then a free copy of my ebook as well. And then this is what I did also. I gave very specific step-by-step instructions on how to enter the contest. So I walked them through how to go on iTunes, click on the certain links, click on the subscribe button, click on ratings and reviews, leave a review. And finally, in order to confirm that people had done all these steps, I had them enter their email address, and that email address added them to my email list. Okay, so in a way, it was like a triple whammy. I got people to subscribe and review my podcast, and I got additional subscribers to my email list that I could use later to market to these people. Okay, so make sure, the important thing if you get anything out of this is to spell out the exact instructions on how to subscribe and review. Even with these instructions, I had people getting it wrong. And if you structure your contest correctly, people will just sign up for iTunes even if they don't have an account just to enter your contest. Okay, so now let's go through and talk about how to submit your podcast to iTunes. Okay, so this is what iTunes looks like when you first launch it. What you want to do is you want to go to the iTunes store. Then you want to click on Podcasts. And then here you want to click on Submit a Podcast. And remember, when we were setting up the RSS feed, it's going to ask you for your feed URL here. Okay, and what you want to do is you want to enter in that feed URL. Now, I'm not going to go ahead and do this because I'm not actually submitting a podcast, but once you enter your feed URL and you click on Continue, all the things that you entered in WordPress regarding your podcast will be displayed. So you want to just do a quick verification that everything is correct. And once you verify that, it's time to just click on the Submit button. And within, I would say, 2 to 10 days, you'll get an email from Apple letting you know that your podcast is live on iTunes. And at that point, every time you publish a new episode on WordPress, it will instantly be transmitted over to iTunes without your intervention. Okay? So while iTunes is very good for Apple users, people who are on Android tend to use a service called Stitcher Radio to listen to podcasts. So I'm going to show you how to submit to Stitcher as well. So this link is going to be displayed below this video, but here's the page with which you submit your podcast to Stitcher Radio. Same sort of process as iTunes. So if you scroll down, so this provider name often confuses people. Basically, this is just the brand name that you're going to be using for your podcast if you have more than one. So in this case, I entered in My Wife Quit Her Job because that's my brand name. You want to enter in your email address and a password, and then you want to hit Continue. And after you hit Continue, you'll also be given a field where you just need to enter in your podcast RSS feed, just like you did in iTunes. Same process, you submit your feed, and then within a couple days, Stitcher will let you know whether your podcast has been entered into Stitcher. Okay, and that's pretty much all there is to it. Within 2 hours, you can have a podcast up and running, have everything set up. It's actually not that intimidating once you know exactly what you need to do. And thanks a lot for taking this course. I really appreciate your time and the fact that you signed up.